Тому, шановні колеги, я б хотіла розпочати з того, що в нас сьогодні відбувається заключний перший цикл навчань по принципам програми Sigma. І насправді це не кінець, це тільки початок, тому що ви знаєте чудово, що програма Sigma наш постійний партнер не тільки Національного агентства України з питань державної служби, Центру адаптації, Вищої школи, але партнер на урядовому рівні, і завдяки саме експертній підтримці наших колег із програми Sigma ми маємо можливість дійсно реформувати державну службу, реформувати державне управління. Той кращий європейський досвід, який є, застосовувати в нас на практиці, і особливо для нас на сьогодні важливо те, що саме в рамках переговорного процесу, саме в рамках членства майбутнього України в Європейському Союзі для нас дуже важлива підтримка наших колег із Європейського Союзу, і саме наших колег, наших експертів програми Sigma, тому дійсно для нас важлива ця дуже співпраця. Тому я дуже була вдячна вам за активність, тому що у нас насправді дуже унікальна можливість долучитися до процесу. На сьогодні наш модуль 5, який стосується питання управління фінансами, він, я не можу сказати, що це технічно. Насправді це дуже стратегічний напрям, тому що завдяки питанням фінансів, завдяки доброчесності саме в фінансовій сфері, ми з вами рухаємося далі, особливо в такий складний для України момент в час війни, доброчесність саме в бюджетній сфері, щоб кожна бюджетна гривня була потрачена ефективно, і для цього ми маємо таку можливість співпрацювати з нашими колегами з програми Sigma, тобто той кращий досвід, який є, він має бути застосований в Україні. Я б хотіла ще раз нагадати про наших експертів, які присутні, які вчора з вами працювали протягом дня, нагадати і ще раз представити, тому що це дійсно не просто експерти, не просто консультанти, це наші справжні колеги, наші друзі, тому що на сьогодні питання управління фінансів, воно є надзвичайно актуальними, і саме в питаннях і угоди про асоціацію, тобто питання, які пов'язані із переговорним процесом, питання фінансів і прозорості є надзвичайно важливим і актуальним. Тому хотіла б ще раз згадати про наших колег пана Алістена Сварбріка, старшого радника, керівника старшого радника програми Sigma і керівника експертної групи по фінансам. Хотіла теж згадати про нашого пана Фердінанда, Пота, старшого радника з питання політики, керівника саме експертної державними фінансами. Тобто це наші колеги, які мають значний досвід в питаннях фінансів країн Європейського Союзу, питання фінансів, і знають чудово особливості української сфери, українських питань, які пов'язані з фінансами. Тому у вас є, знову ж таки, можливість поспілкуватися, задати питання, прокоментувати, уточнити. І я дуже вдячна, що ви з нами, шановні колеги, сьогодні фізично присутні. Для нас надзвичайно важливо, це дійсно підтримка, особливо в такий складний для України час. Тому, шановні колеги, я не буду згадувати всі 5 модулів, протягом часу цього, які ми з вами працювали. Хочу із великою приємністю передати нашим колегам слово, і пане Алістеру Сварбрік, слово вам. Я бажаю нам всім плідної роботи, активної позиції. Буду дуже вдячна за вашу активність. Вчора, можна я в вступному слові скажу, Олексій Петрович, Міністерство фінансів, дійсно дуже приємно, що ви активні, і дійсно для нас це надзвичайно важливо. Дуже вам дякую.
Unfortunately, we can't hear without microphone.
Ми всі в процесі, тому особливо дякуємо за те, що знайшли можливість. Так, дійсно, дуже багато долучились колег онлайн. І якщо будуть запитання, якщо будуть коментарі, будь ласка, доєднуйтесь. Є у нас відповідний чат, і я думаю, що ми теж зможемо попрацювати і в чаті теж. Тому, містер Сварбрік, the floor.
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. Am I on? Is this working? Yes, it is. Good morning, and thank you for that introduction again for the second day of talking about public financial management. Oh, I hate my picture, I really do. Sorry. So yesterday we talked you through the first 5 principles and the indicators and measurement framework for public financial management. We looked at budget management from the budget preparation and medium and annual budget planning through cash and budget execution, treasury management, debt management, and through to reporting on the budget and the scrutiny of the budget of the final reporting. We also talked about the effective management of public resources through effective internal control arrangements and the role of internal audit in promoting effective use of public money. And today we've got 2 more principles that we need to cover in terms of the measurement framework. First, external audit, and then on the financing of regional, local, and local government. So I'm going to talk to you about external audit, and then further on we'll talk to you about the financing of regional and local governments. And if I'm being honest, this is where I am, my real true area of expertise is external audit, having spent the first 25, well, not quite all of my first 25 years. I did internal audit and some financial management as well, but most of that I've been being as an external auditor for the state supreme audit institutions in the United Kingdom and the Caribbean. So, well, I will talk you through the principles and the indicators around external audit. So, okay, what is the principle? What do we actually say? Well, we say that under this principle that we're focusing on whether funds are effectively audited by an independent auditor that provides assurance in the use of public resources and helps to improve the functioning in the public sector. So we are looking at whether there's independent external audit, be that by a supreme audit institution or through any other mechanism that may be in place, because there are other examples around the world of how the service of external audit is delivered, but it is normally through a supreme audit institution that it's done. And under this principle, I think there are, I'll tell you in a minute, there's nine sub-principles, but just to quickly summarize how they're organized, there's 3 main areas of the work of a supreme audit institution that are covered. Firstly, we talk a lot about the independence and organization of the supreme audit institution, whether it's independent, whether it has a mandate that covers all public resources and public funds and policies, its access to premises, and then about its organization in terms of its governance and human resource management. Then we focus on a lot on its audit work, about how they plan that work, whether they do it on all mandatory and periodic audits of various aspects, and whether it can do all the various types of audits that they're supposed to, whether there's procedure, quality management, and ethics. And we also look at audit reporting. And finally, then we look at things like communication and parliamentary scrutiny, and how well the supreme audit institution communicates its activities and its work, and then how Parliament and its entities can actually use that work to effectively scrutinise and hold government to account. And the reality is, a lot of this is based on international standards and the expectations for supreme audit institutions and the external audit of the public sector, which are set out by the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, or INTSI. You might hear me say that a few times today. So, here we go. I think, let's check. I can never remember how many, but there's nine sub-principles that we actually have. So the sub-principle A is about the independence of the Supreme Audit Institution, and that the head of the Supreme Audit and its members, in all its forms, are established, and the independence is established in the Constitution, and they're legally protected and respected in practice. So there is an expectation that the institution, the head, the chairman of the accounting chamber here, and the members of the accounting chamber here are independent of the government, and they are able to conduct their work effectively without any interference. That's the expectations of the international standards. Then, second sub-principle B. The mandate covers all public funds and policies. There's an expectation that the supreme audit institutions or the external auditors should be able to audit everything that is a public sector, or the government, certainly the central government. So that includes anything under the budget, but extra budgetary funds, other things. It doesn't matter how they're funded, but if they are, they're regarded as the central government, or even things like state-owned enterprises, which are, in most cases, where there's 50% or more owned by the central government. Some countries, even less. They can audit any state-owned enterprise, no matter how much is owned. But there is an expectation that they can audit all public funds. Sub-principle C, the SAI or other professional independent auditors periodically audit all public funds in accordance with international audit standards through financial compliance and performance audits. So there's an expectation that all these public funds are audited against the international standards that are set out. They're called the SIs, the International Standards of Supreme Audit Institutions. They specify exactly what they are, and they set out requirements in terms of financial audit, compliance audit, and performance audit, the three types of audits that Supreme Audit Institutions can do. And that covers any type of audit work that they want to do in reality. Sub-principle D is about unrestricted access to premises, documents, and information of audited entities. This should be, it's very much like for the internal auditors, but the same for the external auditors. They should have unrestricted access to premises, documents, information, and that's including electronic databases. You should be able to gain access to that. Should be no prevention through things like, we've heard excuses like data protection, various other uses from auditees, but that shouldn't be a problem. There is an ethical responsibility on the Supreme Audit Institution to maintain confidentiality of all information it receives. So they should be able to access anything that's appropriate for their audit work. Even state secrets sometimes, you know. From my former alma mater, which used to be part of the European Union, the United Kingdom, unfortunately is no longer there, but we used to audit defence, and we used to audit the Secret Service as well. They won't tell you that, I haste that on their website, you won't be able to find that, but we did do those sort of audits of their financial transactions. We got access to all their relevant information, we just couldn't share lots of their information publicly. That was the only difference in that regard. Then sub-principle E. This is a new one that we put into the revised principles this time around, and this is about the organisation, governance, and human resource management of the SAI. For example, do they conduct effective strategic planning, or effective operational planning, human resource planning, that sort of thing, to ensure that they have and improve their institutional professional capacity to deliver their job, deliver their work. Sub-principle F. This is saying that the SAI maintains procedures for quality management and ethics on an organisational level in accordance with international standards. There are specific standards that the Supreme Audit Institutions have to meet in terms of quality management, which has just been revised actually, and they are quite onerous, and it's fundamentally important for a Supreme Audit Institution to have to follow these, to make sure they have quality. It's not just in terms of technical quality, but in quality in terms of their impact and how they report in public as well. These sort of things are fundamental as well to ensuring quality and that the people use their work effectively. So this is very onerous to ensure the credibility of the institutions. And then also on ethics, there are specific codes of ethics that are specified in international standards that these institutions need to take regard to and comply with. Sub-principle G, audit reports are concise and contain relevant and useful recommendations, and procedures are in place to follow up an audit report. So we're looking for them to produce impactful and high-quality audit reports, which are actually easy to read, not huge and humongous tomes of lots of legislative provisions and all sorts of strange things that we see in some reports. We're actually looking for short, impactful reporting. That's what we tend like to see from them. And that there are procedures in place to follow up on their work, so that when they make recommendations and make suggestions for improvement, that they continue to follow up on that with the auditees to see how much progress is being made and being taken forward. Sub-principle H, the SAI communicates widely on its activities and audit results through the media, websites, and other means, and makes the reports publicly available in a timely manner. This is a new sub-principle we've included in the principles this time. There has been a great push within the SAI community to enhance and increase their communication. to make their work more relevant to the public and to the citizens. So one of the things that they generally across all sides around the world in Europe is to make sure that they effectively communicate their work, actually engage with citizens more effectively about their work. And so we try to look at that in terms of what we're assessing from there and there. And the final sub-principle is about whether the Parliament and its committees, in accordance with an existing mechanism, regularly consider SAI reports, take decisions based on them, and follow up on them. So we're basically asking whether the Parliament is using the work of the Supreme Audit Institution to effectively hold the government to account, hold sessions, inquiries with them to see how using the SAI's work, to see how government is addressing the issues that have been addressed, and to help improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the public service ultimately. That is the objective in that. Okay, so that's the sub-principles. And this is the indicator frame that we take. Now, I have to say there's not quite a one-to-one match between the sub-indicators and the sub-principles. There's, in terms of follow-up and recommendations, there's two indicators when there's only one principle. And then in terms of two of the principles, one on independence and the one on access to documents, they're both included in the first sub-indicator. But you'll see where we put some most significant weight here. Firstly, around the independence of the SAI and its legal and operational independence and financial independence. That gets 20 out of the 100 points, so a fifth of the marks goes to independence of the institution. And then in terms of implementation of audit recommendations, that's getting 15 out of the 20 as well. So that's the impact of that work is also seen as being having a greater weight in how we assess the work of the Supreme Audit Institution, or the external auditors, we should say. Okay, right. So let's go through the sub-indicators. Sub-indicator 1, about the independence of the Supreme Audit Institution, where there's 20 points. There are 17 sub-indicators in this. No, 17 criteria, sorry. I haven't put them all on the screen, but I've summarized them. So, in terms of the actual legal framework, we assess the legal framework in a number of areas, within which there's a total of 8 points for. We asked about whether the Constitution itself ensures the independence of the Supreme Audit Institution, whether it specifically says that, and whether the head of the SAI and the members of the SAI are independent in that regard. We also asked whether the legal framework, like, for example, the law on the accounting chamber here, whether that says the SAI is an independent organisation in how it conducts its work. And then we specifically look at a number of aspects in the legal framework. It's normally in the SAI law, but it can also be impacted by other laws like the civil service legislation, legislation on salaries, things like that can have an impact on these things as well. But we're asking whether the legal framework provides the SAI with financial autonomy in terms of its budget approval process and its use of the financial resources that are approved by Parliament. That it has autonomy in discharging its mandate, in other words, whether it has complete autonomy in deciding what audits it has to do, apart from maybe a few that will be mandated, such as the audit of the annual state budget execution or financial audit of ministries may be, in some countries, specifically required on an annual basis. Whether the legal framework provides them with the right and the obligation to report on their work. All SAIs should be able to report on their work and be obliged to report on their work as well. Whether they're free to decide the content and timing of their audit reports and publish them effectively. We'd expect all SAIs to be able to decide what they put into their reports, the timing of those reports, and be able to publish them, as long as their reports meet the requirements of the international standards, I would say. Whether the legal frameworks provide them with protection from a Supreme Court in terms of conducting their work, and protection in terms of trying to prevent them from protect their independence as well. And then we also assess whether they have the right to access, whether the law provides them the right to access premises, documents, and information, whether it sets out clearly and specifically. Then, in terms of, we look at how things actually operate in practice from a number of perspectives, whether we have awarded 11 points out of the 20 for actually what happens in practice. We look at the appointment of the latest appointment of the head of this, or the members of the head of the Supreme Audit Institution, whether that is done in line with the legal framework and whether it's an independent process, whether the head is appointed not by the government but by potentially the Parliament or other independent mechanism. We consider whether there's any removal of the head or members of the SAI in the last 3 years for reasons not specified in the legislation. There are a number of reasons which is legitimate for the removal of the head. Death being obvious, I suppose. Seems sort of, why would you have to legislate it? But they often do. Long-term illness, committing a criminal offence. What we're looking for is that there's no sort of reasons which would provide political influence on removing the head of the SAI. So the law should not provide the ability for the government just to remove the head of the SAI for whatever for a report we didn't like. There should be specific reasons that are in legislation, and there should be no inappropriate ability for the government to remove the head of the SAI. We also look at whether the appointment of the head of the institution, the Supreme Audit Institution, is for a sufficiently long and fixed term. While there's no actual clear international standard about this, the expectation, or the recent sort of developments, is that good practices is that heads of Supreme Audit Institutions are appointed for 1 term only, but for a sufficiently long time, or between over 7 to, we give up to 15 years. It's normally around 7 to 10 years, but in terms of our scoring framework, we say 7 to 15 years. But we also, if you are reappointed, we also, for a minimum, we'd expect is 5 years for the appointment head. And if they are reappointed, only for 2 terms maximum as well. We also look to make sure there's no significant gaps between the appointments of the heads of the Supreme Audit Institutions. Then we ask what happened in practice around budget and the use of the budget, whether the executive exercised direct control over the formulation of the side budget, or undue influence over it, and then also in how the side used its financial resources during the year, whether there was any influence in that. We also ask questions around whether there was any interference in the organisation and the management of the site. In other words, how they organise themselves structurally, which we have seen that, where the government legislation requires a certain organisation which restricts the ability of the site to manage itself effectively. So we make sure there's no issues of that. And then in terms of access to records, information, to premises, we ask whether there's been any access denial in the last 3 years. And we're not just talking about auditees being a little bit difficult and delaying providing access. We're actually talking about whether there's been no access to certain institutions or certain documents, which we have seen examples of in some countries, that some institutions have denied the Supreme Audit Institution access to their premises and their records occasionally, which should not happen. Okay. So obviously, in terms of do this, we're reviewing the laws, constitution, decisions by parliaments on appointment or removal of the heads of the SAI members. We're looking at the organisational, budgetary and financial documents. And a lot of this is based on interviews with the SAI management as well, around things like access denial and things like that. But if you're adding it all up, that's only 19 of the 20 points in terms of those 2 areas. There's one more. There's a survey question. And we asked the civil service whether they consider the SAI to be independent in how it conducts its work. And you can see that's the perceptions from across the Western Balkans in 2024 about how the civil service see the SAIs in their countries, whether they consider them independent or not. Which is, they're okay, those results. I'd live with that. Seems pretty reasonable from my perspective. Okay, so that's independence. So then, somebody is about the adequacy and coverage of the SAI mandate and its alignment with the IFPP. The IFPP stands for the Inter-SAI Framework of Professional Pronouncements. In other words, the international auditing standards for the Supreme Audit Institutions. Okay. So, what are the five? We've got five criteria here. Firstly, the first criteria is about audit type mandate, whether the size and power to carry out the three types of audits that supreme audit institutions are expected to carry out, which are financial audits or financial statements, compliance audits, and performance audits. Performance audits are being audits of efficiency, effectiveness, and economy in the use of public resources. Second criteria is about the bodies that are subject to audit, and so, as the description says here, it's about whether all public financial operations, regardless of whether and how they are reflected in the national budget, are subject to audit by the SAI and other independent external auditors, or other independent external auditors. So, we're basically saying that all public operations, even whether they're financed fully from the budget, partially from the budget, or not from the budget, are subject to audit by the Supreme Audit Institution. Then the third criteria is coverage of financial compliance audit, and we're looking at the coverage of mandatory financial and compliance audits. This generally tends to be, in most countries, the audit of the state budget execution statement or the state's financial statements. It can, in some countries, be the audit of ministries. And in other countries, it can be the audit of all financial statements of public sector bodies. Like in my own country, the United Kingdom, we audit every single agency, ministry every year. We look at all their financial statements. So there's lots of audit opinions. I think there's like 450, 500 audit opinions on financial statements issued by the National Audit Office in the United Kingdom. But we measure the percentage of all the mandatory audits that have been conducted, and often the reality is we see 100%. We'd like to think we see 100% being conducted, they should be done. And then in terms of the coverage of performance audits, we're looking at to see whether the Supreme Audit Institution in the last year has conducted audits in a range of different policy sectors. So I think if we cover 5 of the policy sectors, you get the full points for this. So, for example, we're talking here about what are the 5 the policy sectors we're looking at, things like defence, education, health, foreign affairs. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but we set out a number of potential policy sectors, and we see whether the SAI conducted performance audits in those relevant policy areas. And then the final one is coverage of EU policy priorities. So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about whether the SAI has covered certain policy priorities that the EU has specified in the last 3 calendar years. So we're talking things about green agenda, digitalization, SDGs, things like that. These are the sort of topics du jour that we'd expect to see. So we're looking at whether the SAI has covered these sort of areas in their work in terms of in their audits in the last 3 years. Okay. So then we move on to governance and management of the SAI in sub-indicator 3, and here we have 11 criteria. The first 4 are about the strategic plan. Firstly, whether the plan is based on needs assessment or analysis. Whether that strategic plan sets out clear objectives, including outward-looking ones with measurable indicators. Whether that strategic plan is supported by an action plan or an implementation matrix, and whether that strategic plan is publicly available. So that's the first 4 criteria. Next 2 are about the annual operational plan that they should have in place. And this we're looking at in terms of 5 and 6. So we're looking to see that they have a plan in place which have activities, timelines, and responsibilities clearly defined. And that annual operational plan covers all of the work of the SAI, including not just its audit work, but also its own operational and support services for its improvement. Then criteria 7, we're looking at whether they have a process or a system in place for regular in-year monitoring of progress against the strategic and the operational plans, and whether that's actually implemented in practice. Criteria 8 is looking at whether the SAI publishes an annual report on its own performance, including the performance against the strategic objectives and the performance indicators that it's established for itself. So we're just talking about here about good strategic and operational planning ultimately for an institution. Then criteria 9 is about human resource planning and whether the SAI has a strategy that is aligned with strategic objectives for human resources. And we're not looking necessarily for separate human resource strategy. It could be part of their overall strategy and their overall planning. But we are looking to see that the SAI is effectively looking at human resource needs and the development of its human resources, and that they have clear targets and indicators established for that. And then criteria 10 is about whether the SAI has a learning strategy and or professional development training plan based on needs analysis. Are they planning, how they're looking at how to develop their staff and the professional competences of their staff. And then finally, we're looking at whether the SAI prepares an annual financial report which is subject to independent audit. You know, I always say that the Supreme Audit Institution should lead by example in being the best institution in the country, or try to be. And if they're auditing other people, they should be subject to audit themselves. So at a minimum, we'd expect their audits, their financial reporting, or financial statements to be subject to audit regularly. Personally, I'd like to see it done annually, but I think the legislation here now includes the requirement for it to be done every 3 years, which is recently brought in. And they are now required to be the accounting chamber are now required to be peer reviewed as well about all their work, actually. So, in terms of what we're looking for here, we're looking in terms of what we look at the strategic planning, the action plan related to that strategic plan, operational plans, evidence of in-year monitoring or progress and things like that. We're looking at their annual performance report that they should all be producing, human resource strategy, learning strategy, professional development plan, and their audited financial report if they have one. Okay. Any questions before I go? Just make an excuse to have a drink of water. You're obviously excited by external audit. I find it a thrilling subject myself. But anyway. Indicator 4, compliance of the audit methodology with the international standards of the Supreme Audit Institutions. That's what SI stands for. And whether the audits are conducted in accordance with the SIs. So here we have 7 indicators. 7 criteria, sorry. So the first 3 criteria here are about the audit methodologies that are employed by the Supreme Audit Institution. So we're assessing whether the financial audit methodology, the compliance audit methodology, and the performance audit methodology that the SIs should have developed in their manuals and guidance, etc., and whether they comply with the international standards of the Supreme Audit Institutions. So basically, we just review their audit methodologies against the checklist we have for what we expect to see in those methodologies. And then criteria 4, 5, 6, and 7, we're looking at what should be part of their quality management systems to ask them whether those systems have reported and reviewed audits to show that their audit work has been conducted in line with the international standards of Supreme Audit Institutions. So they have 2 types of reviews that they should be doing as part of the quality management system of their audits internally. One is called EQR, which stands for Engagement Quality Reviews, or HOT reviews of their audits, which are reviews that they should be doing as their audits are being finished and before they finally report on them, before they actually report those audits. They should be looking to see whether those audits have been conducted in compliance with their own audit methodology. And secondly, they should be doing inspections after the audit's been reported in the cold light of day to also ensure that the audits have been done in line with what is like compliant methodology. So we're basically asking the questions here 4, 5, 6, and 7 under these criteria, whether the reports of on the engagement quality reviews, the hot reviews, and the inspections or cold reviews have shown that the SIs have conducted their work in line with their methodology, which is compliant with the international standards of the Supreme Audit Institutions. And the reality we're finding at the moment still is that most places haven't implemented, most SIs that we're looking at haven't actually effectively implemented their quality management systems, so they can't actually report on 4, 5, 6, and 7 very well at this stage. I'm going to tell you this is where we potentially have a weakness in our methodology. No, not a weakness, it's just a reality that we have to use these things as a proxy for trying to measure the quality of the audit work that the SIs are doing. We do not have the time, the scope to actually conduct reviews of the audits ourselves as part of our assessments. That's a huge task. It would take weeks to do that effectively, to provide an opinion. And when you do an assessment, that's not really possible. So we're basing it as a proxy, as using their own quality management systems as a proxy for helping us to determine whether the work's done in line with the standards. Okay, so now we go on to PA5, which is about quality management of the supreme audit institution. And this is about whether they have set up processes and procedures to effectively manage the quality of their work. So criteria 1, unsurprisingly, is whether they have established policies and procedures for quality management covering all of its work. So we're talking about quality management, not just of the audit work, but whether they have quality management procedures for and making sure everything that's done in institutions done to high quality. So do they have arrangements to ensure that their own financial management is done effectively, that they have internal controls in place, that their communications are done appropriately to high standards, these sort of things. So in terms of the supreme audit institution, the quality management standards that are expected of them is that everything is done to high quality. Then the second criteria is whether the quality management policies clearly articulate a risk-based approach focused on achieving quality objectives. So the expectation for a size that they set out what their quality objective as an organisation is, and that they assess the risks to achieving those quality objectives. That's what's set out in the standards for them. So that's what their expectations is in doing this. Criteria 3 is sets out, asks whether the quality management policies in the SI clearly articulate who has ultimate responsibility for quality in the SI, and who has day-to-day responsibility for quality management. Ultimately, the SI, the head of the SI should be overall have responsibility for quality in that institution, but somebody should manage quality on a day-to-day basis at a senior management level as well. Then the next two sub-criteria, these next two criteria, 4 and 5, set out whether the quality management policies clearly articulate the arrangements for engagement quality reviews, the EQRs, and hot reviews I previously talked about, and whether they set out arrangements for the monitoring, remediation arrangements, and including inspections or cold reviews of audit engagements. So this is basically 4 and 5 is about the arrangements for reviewing internally the audit work that's been done to make sure that it's been conducted to high quality standards. Then criteria 6 is about whether the SI has a code of ethics in place, which is aligned with the requirements of ISI 130, and that this code of ethics is publicly available. ISI 130 is the international standard that sets out the expectations for a code of ethics in a supreme audit institution. Then criteria 7, following on from this one about code of ethics, it's whether under 7 we're asking whether the SI regularly obtains from all personnel that they're required to be independent written confirmation that they meet the independence, objectivity, and impartiality obligations. It's a lot of words, but it's basically ensuring that the SI regularly ensures that. Okay, so criteria 8 is then we're asking, and it's similar to what we had in the previous indicator 4 around the audit work as well, but in criteria 8 here we're asking whether a sample of individual audit engagements were actually selected for engagement quality review or hot review, and that the results were reported prior to the date of finalization of the audit report, which is the expectation for a hot review that the review is completed before the audit report is published or finalized. Then we're also asking whether a sample of completed audit engagements across the range of these size work have been subject to review or inspections, cold review, subsequent to the reporting. And then criteria 10 is whether those reviews conducted under criteria 8 and 9 have been conducted, whether these actually the reports from these reviews state whether the audits have been conducted in accordance with auditing standards, basically, and that the results were consistent with the audit evidence. So basically, that the audit is in line with standards, and that the audit findings are supported by evidence, which is fundamentally important for any audit work, if I'm being honest. And then indicators, criteria 11 and 12, sets out that we're looking for the SAI to actually ask the SAI whether they actually ask for feedback about the quality of their work, which is sort of increasing the expectations of pre-board institutions. So we're asking whether the SAI seeks feedback from the audited entities about the quality of the audit process, and how they see, whether they see the audit team as being professional. And then we're asking under criteria 12 whether the SAI actually seeks feedback from its audited bodies about the quality and relevance of the audit reports that they've provided. These are about, we'd expect the SAI to find ways to see how it can improve its work, and this is one mechanism we'd expect them to use, which is actually to ask for the people that are subject to audit whether there's any way they think the SAI can improve its work, and do that on a regular basis. My own experience, one of my institutions, we'd ask annually the auditees how they found the audit. Actually issue them a survey, ask them for their thinking, what could be improved, what went well, that sort of thing, not for catching anybody out, just to help improve the audit process. So in terms of looking at the quality management, and that's just the cover of the quality management standard for the Supreme Audit institutions, we're looking at the quality management documents of the SAI, looking at the code of ethics, code of conduct, the staff confirmations of independence or declarations of interest. We're looking at a sample of the hot and cold review reports that they've produced and done, and then we're actually looking for evidence of the feedback they've got from auditees, or the things like copies of the surveys they've carried out, or whatever else, or other sources of information to have got the feedback from the auditees on. Right. Reporting and follow-up of audits. So here we have eight criteria. So usual starting point in most of these criteria. Criteria 1 are the policies and procedures for reporting on all audit engagements that are established, including template reports. So do the SAI actually have clear policies about how they report their work? Have they set up template reports in which to use as the basis for their work, or reporting standards that they expect to use? Then criteria 2 is about, in terms of any SAI audit reports and findings and recommendations, whether they're actually subject to comment and response from the audited entities. So do the audited entities have an opportunity to comment on the draft reports before they are finalised and made public or presented to Parliament? Then criteria 3 is about, sometimes there are set standards or timescales which reports have to be addressed, particularly for mandatory audits on things like the audit of the state budget, the audit of ministry financial statements, and we ask whether the SAI is submitting their reports on the audit opinions on these audits in line with legally established legal or agreed time frames. And this criteria 4 is whether those opinions or reports are published in a timely manner to the public as well, in line with the standard, the requirements expected. Then criteria 5 is whether the SAI itself has a follow-up system to ensure that audit entities properly address observations and recommendations. So has the SAI set up a system to monitor the recommendations as implemented? It's made. For example, they often have databases of recommendations, and then they follow up with the audited entities on a regular basis to see what progress has been made. That is one mechanism. And then criteria 6 is whether the SAI's operational audit plans include follow-up audits, which are carried out in practice and reported. So apart from having a mechanism to monitor recommendations, they should also be carrying out some follow-up audit works on, particularly around specific high priority and risk areas, to see what's happened with their recommendations and see if the auditees have actually implemented them. So we're asking that question. And then finally, we have 2 survey criteria at the end here, 7 and 8, where we're asking the civil service whether they find the SAI's reports easy to understand, or whether they're easy to understand, and also whether they find The reports contain useful and relevant recommendations. So the civil service get the chance to get their own revenge on the Supreme Audit Institution if they don't like them particularly. So what are we looking for in terms of the documents when we're doing these assessing these criteria, looking at the policies and procedures for audit reporting, looking at whether they have template reports. We're looking at evidence for responses from entities to show that they've had an opportunity to comment on draft reports. We look at the data and monitoring reports provided by the SI itself and the timing and submission of audit reports. We look to see if they have a database of recommendations or equivalent. And actually, these days, many Supreme Audit institutions make their database of recommendations public on their websites, generally speaking. And then we also look at their operational and audit plans to see that whether they include follow-up audits and things like that in them. And obviously, we look at their survey results. And I'm stuck. Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. Right, we're getting near the end. So, sub-indicator 7, implementation of audit recommendations. So here we've got just two criteria. We assess whether the audit recommendations are accepted by the auditees, what the percentage of accepted recommendations are. You know, if there's a low rate of acceptance of the recommendations by the auditees, you have to wonder what the quality of the audit recommendations actually are. But generally, there's a fairly high level of acceptance. And the criteria too is then on the reported implementation rate of audit recommendations by the auditees. So we look for this in terms of data provided by the Supreme Audit Institution itself on its audit recommendations accepted and the implementation rate. And the chart here basically shows the results over 2020 and 2023 of our assessments in the Western Balkans of implementation of audit recommendations. So mixed results. We're around 50% for most countries. There's up and down between the years. You know, there's no clear trend. We'd like to think things will be improving, going up, but there's at least three countries, three out of the six, where it's gone backwards. So, you know, I'm not sure what actual judgment you can make based on that, but surveys seem to be doing quite well in terms of getting the acceptance of the implementation of recommendations. But the reality is actually some of this depends on the type of recommendations they're making, whether they are very narrowly defined, whether they're easy to deal with, or whether they're very broadly defined. There's all sorts of things that I guess that make this challenging and different, but it's one of the few ways we have to really measure the impact of the Supreme Audit institutions. So, sub-indicator 8 is now about external engagement and communication. And here again we have 6 criteria. Firstly, we're looking whether the CSI has a communication or external engagement strategy or plan, and that is aligned with the strategic plan and objectives of the SI. We don't necessarily need to see a separate strategy or plan here. It could be part of their overall strategic plan or their operational plans, but we expect to see something around how they're going to effectively communicate or engage with their external stakeholders in their planning. Criteria 2 here is about whether the SI communicates with its stakeholders about its roles, responsibilities and activities through its media, websites and other means. While there's not a specific requirement to the international standards, it is an expectation set out in the overall framework for SIs, in the IFPP, the SI Framework of Professional Pronouncements. They do expect that SIs will communicate effectively about their role, responsibilities and activities in certain ways. So we look at that as one of our key criteria. Following on from that, under criteria 3, we're looking to see that the site actively promotes its reports in public throughout the year, whether they actually make their reports public and then promote them in other ways through whatever media conferences, press releases, conferences, other ways of looking at social media more and more. These sort of things, we'd like to see that they are actually trying to use their work, create some consensus about their work and create pressure on the government to improve things and change things. Then criteria 4, we're actually asking again whether the SAI regularly systematically seeks feedback about its work conducted from various stakeholders. So are they looking to the government, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, citizens, to get their views about their work? Is it conducted in the right places? Are they looking at the right topics? Are the reports useful? Do they work? So we're looking to see if they're getting feedback about that sort of thing. And then criteria 5 is following on from that, is whether they're seeking, the SAI is regularly and systematically seeking input to its plans and work from various stakeholders. This is where we're really looking for them to engage with civil society, NGOs about, and the government to an extent, about are they tackling the right issues in their audits? What would be the priorities? So we now see often some SAIs are holding regular meetings with civil society organizations or NGOs to get their input about the key issues that should be addressed and considered by the SAI. And I would also say the SAI always gets to decide itself what it should do, but it should be looking to get views from key stakeholders as well. And then we've got this very simple question at the end here in criteria 6. Stakeholders know what the SAI does. It seems like a really simple and maybe a little bit silly question, but it's an important question because you'd be amazed how many people don't know, well, you wouldn't be amazed probably actually, but a lot of people don't know what the Supreme Audit Institution does, what their role is, and if they do, sometimes they don't really understand their role either. They think they're an anti-corruption body, which is not necessarily, it's one of the byproducts of their roles, but it's not necessarily their main role. But so we asked that question as well. So the sort of documents we're looking for here are, again, under this sub-indicator, we're looking at communication and external engagement strategy, strategic documents, action plans, monitoring. We're looking at their communication channels, their tools and activities around communication, and then we're looking for evidence of directing engagement with stakeholders, such as regular meetings with civil society organizations, academia, to discuss plans and topics. Looking for evidence of surveys that may be conducted as well, and conferences and seminars and such like. And this is what the results of the survey question was. Would you say stakeholders know what the SAI does in the Western Balkans? Under 50% probably. Albania is quite high actually, but they've got a high profile. The Albanian Supreme Audit has got quite a high profile for some reason. But some of the other ones are less so. But yeah. Okay. And this is sub-indicator 9, the final one, the use of SAI reports by the legislature. This is often one of the main ways that the SAI can have impact, is through this Parliament using their work to scrutinise the executive and government, to make sure that they address the findings produced by the SAI. It depends. It not always working effectively, but it's what we expect to see in good practice. So whether the first criteria is whether the Parliament has a formal mechanism for handling the SAI reports, which includes a committee formally dedicated to handling that. So in a number of countries you will see a separate audit committee or a public accounts committee which uses the work of the SAI and has got a specific role using their work to hold the government accountable, ask them questions, hold inquiries into certain reports and topics, and make recommendations. Criteria 2 is that reports are considered within 3 months of being submitted to Parliament. Timing is important in everything, and timely follow-up of the reports produced by the SAI to have impact is important, so we look at that. Then we're looking at whether a relevant committee within the Parliament has held at least 5 hearings with auditees at the political and or senior level during the last full calendar year. So whether, for example, which would be the case, is the Budget Committee here, I think, has got the responsibility at the moment, whether they've held hearings with at least 5 times with the auditees, government ministries, or departments, etc., to discuss all the reports on them and follow up on that. Criteria is, you can see I copied my slides, I've got my numbering wrong here. Just criteria, which says criteria 6, which should be criteria 4. I apologise. I fully get tired by the time I finish writing these slides. Well, there's whether the committee reaches independent decisions and make recommendations or follow-up. So whether the parliamentary committee that's considered the report and has taken held an inquiry with government makes its own conclusions based on the report and the evidence provided during the hearings and makes recommendations. Often we see that their recommendations are basically just repeating the size recommendations where this happens, but that's the case. Criteria 5, which says 7 here, that the committee hearings are held in public, except in limited circumstances, for things like national security or similar sensitive issues. Criteria 6, which says 8. Then the next one is the Parliamentary Committee have follow-up mechanisms on the implementation of the decisions and recommendations, whether the Parliament Committee itself actually follows up what it's recommended or it's from its hearings previously. And then the final criteria here is whether subject committees consider and hold hearings on the SAI reports relevant to their policy competencies. So whether, for example, the Health Committee or the Education Committee would hold hearings on audit reports related to or on audits that conducted maybe in the education sector or the health sector, whether they use the work as well. So here we're looking at reporting practices of the SAI and whether there's a formal document of how the Parliament uses the SAI's work. Then we're looking at details of parliamentary sessions that have held to discuss the SAI reports, whether that be through an audit committee, a subject committee, or the plenary of the Parliament, and also then in parliamentary records. So, like with the other areas, in the PAR-IS system that we use to conduct the assessments and the questionnaire that we issue before we do the assessment, we issue 52 questions on the SAI's work, which is all for, in the case of Ukraine, 52 questions that the accounting chamber of Ukraine will have to answer in the document, providing answers in narrative form. They'll have to provide tables of number of audits conducted in various aspects, performance audits conducted, and attach various documents like their legislation, their annual reports, their annual plans, that sort of thing. And here's a visualization of results on the Western Balkans in 2024 for the Supreme Audit Institution. And they are one of the strongest performers across the whole of the principles, I have to be honest. We see this generalism, strength, independence, although there's been a few challenges around independence. Mandates are fine, the general governance and management generally okay, everything's okay. It's quite a good picture. I think some aspects of quality management certainly need improvement, and there's still weaknesses in the implementation of audit recommendations. The biggest problem, biggest challenge, as you can, it's fairly obvious, is the use of the reports by the legislatures. The government, the legislative parliaments are not really using the work effectively in a number of countries, or at all in some instances. So, limiting the actual impact, really, of the work of the Supreme Audit institutions in some cases as well, and the influence that they have. So time to talk. Before we move on to the financing of regional and local government, which I'm sure will be a thrilling topic to discuss, do you have any questions about external audit and our indicator framework for assessing the accounting chamber, really, in reality?
Actually, I have a question not directly related to the SAI and to the framework you presented, but a little bit different. It's about interaction with independent fiscal institutions. If we have so powerful and independent Supreme Audit institution, what is the reason to have another institution doing the same job? So I already know the answer, but I would like to hear your opinion on the
different roles, basically, from my perspective. The independent fiscal institutions providing a view on the assumptions and the economic assumptions that you're basing the budget document on, which is quite different from actually auditing effective implementation of the budget and the use of the resources, etc. So, you know, they're looking at whether the government has made effective assumptions and reliable, based on their budget on reliable information and planning on reliable information, which is, you know, we have seen some sites that do some of that, but that's not generally their core competence. It's normally to audit the actual, how the resources have actually been used in practice and implemented, and whether, and also the financial reporting of that, whether that's true and fair and reasonable, and whether they've implemented the resources effectively and efficiently, rather than assessing whether the economic and financial assumptions and on which the plans have been based are made, and reaching opinions on that.
And other part of the job is compliance with fiscal rules, for example. In that part, SAI can do that assessment too. I believe it's not a big problem.
Yeah, they could do that.
I see it's still some duplications on functions, but
you know, and there are sites that do the assessment of whether the fiscal rules have been met. I'm not going to say it, but that's only one part of what an independent fiscal institution could do, and much broader than that. In terms, so I think, yeah, you know, it depends how the independent fiscal institution is established as well, whether that's a part of the parliamentary office and things like that as well. So it depends. It could be a boss of an executive branch of the government as well. That's the other aspect. So, you know, then there's independence. But yeah, anyway. But no, I think they are broadly different rules. You know, it's not like size will reach your opinions about the sustainability of public finances at times and do things like that. But it's not their core work. It's more about whether you're using resources effectively and efficiently, and delivering projects on time and doing that effectively, whether your financial reporting is credible and true and fair, and you're actually reporting the transactions you completed, things like that. So, you know, I think that their roles are quite, but saying that, there are, just so you know, there are examples of Supreme Audit institutions which are the Audit Authority, which for audit of EU funds, the external auditor of the government, as well as being the Fiscal Council as well. Lithuania, for example, is one example of that. But then there are clear Chinese walls between the roles within the institutions as well. But there are some examples where they do all this. It does cause a bit of confusion, though, about what their role is, the reality. So, anything else? No? We're all done. I can stop talking and I can make very decent work for the rest of the day. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Just coming back to your question as well. I think the Fiscal Council should look at the budget, basically, and whether the budget adheres to the fiscal policy established by the government. Supreme Audit Institution is looking at the implementation of the budget. So afterwards, Fiscal Council ex ante to see. So yes, the Supreme Audit Institution can afterwards say that fiscal rules are not adhered to during the implementation of the budget, but they should not say anything about, let's say, the formulation of the budget. That is the Fiscal Council that needs to do that. So I think that is a key difference. Where am I? So, no, I mean, we all have to be flexible in mind. So we go from two very different topics. So we just discussed external audit by the Supreme Audit Institution, the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine. And now we go to a very different topic, which is, fiscal autonomy of local governments. Basically, it is the public finance element related to local government functioning. Just as an, let's say, to have the big picture. So what we are doing here, it all relates with, let's say, the way that the European Commission is monitoring the progress of Ukraine towards the EU requirements. We have explained, so there is one set of requirements which, it's not a chapter, but actually it's called more important, it's called the fundamentals of accession. And one of those fundamentals is a good functioning public administration. A good functioning public administration has different areas, and one of those areas is public financial management. I think it's about now 3 years ago that the European Commission mentioned that in the function of public administration, also attention needs to be given to how local government is working. That was a new element in the area of public administration. So at that moment also it was discussed with Sigma how to operationalize, let's say, the monitoring of how local government is functioning, how to include that in these fundamentals of public administration. So that was a new topic, so around 3 years ago. And we have included it in our, let's say, principle framework, and we did it in the following way. We have not established a separate chapter of area only focusing on local governments. We didn't do that. Instead, we've split the area in two areas, to split, let's say, this element of local government in two areas. One area is focusing on policy implementation by local governments of public policies, and another area was focusing on the financing of local governments. So we have one area, it's called accountability, where we look at how the central government is making sure that public services are well delivered and that there is accountability of the institutions that delivers public services to the central government. In that area, we look at the service delivery of local government. Then we have also the area of public finance management, and in that area we look at how local governments are financed. So, because in this, let's say, in this training we only do public finance management, we only focus on the financial aspects of local governments. So the service delivery aspect and the accountability of local governments is done in the accountability area of the whole framework. So that is a first explanation. So we look at the financial aspects, the funding aspects relating to the functioning of local governments. There are different models for this in the world, how local governments are operating and how they are funded. In our framework and in the framework of the European Commission, let's say, the good practice or the practice that is being pursued is informed by, maybe you are familiar with that, it is the Charter of Local Self-Government. It has been formulated by the Council of Europe, which especially deals with how local governments are functioning. And in this, let's say, Charter of Local Self-Government, what is very important is that local government is not used anymore by the central government only as an executive branch of the central government, but deconcentrated in the country. But it is used as a decentralized structure. That is meaning that the local government has a certain level of autonomy in how it decides on let's say, on service delivery. So that is a key principle of that underlies also this principle, is that based on the Charter of Local Governments, that autonomy is given to local governments to make their own decisions based on their own considerations, what is good for their citizens in their municipalities or their local governments. So that's why, let's say, Principle 32 is looking at to what extent this autonomy of local governments is also reflected in the financial, let's say, regulations. Maybe also good to mention that our framework is and what the EU is looking for is not looking into how local governments internally are functioning. So we are not looking at how a city administration is functioning and is doing well its public finance management. We are only looking at how the central government has organized itself to ensure that local governments can function in a more or less autonomous manner. So it's basically the coordinating, facilitating role of the central government to facilitate local governments to operate autonomously. That is what we try to capture and try to measure in this principle. So yeah, in the formulation then, it focuses on whether local governments have resources and adequate fiscal autonomy to exercise their tasks and responsibilities, while central government still has, let's say, the financial oversight to ensure that let's say, local government is operating within, let's say, certain, let's say, autonomous within certain limits, so to say. This whole indicator is, as all the others, is divided in different elements. And for fiscal autonomy, then indicator 32, we have 6 different, let's say, sub-indicators to measure that. The first one is looking basically at the legal framework for fiscal autonomy, so whether the legislative framework is in place. The second indicator looks at whether let's say, the legal framework and also in practice whether the central government makes sure that there are not too large differences within the country between different regions and local governments. Like in all countries, there are rich cities and there are, let's say, cities in more, let's say, a difficult situation, and central government has a role to ensure that there is, let's say, the income differences are somehow mitigated. A little bit less for the rich and a little bit more for the poor municipalities, so to say. As I said, this principle is looking at is based on the idea that local governments should be autonomous and can make autonomous decisions. But the third sub-principle is well making sure that there is a certain level of oversight by the central government of local governments. That it's not the case that local governments can do everything what they have in mind. So that's then the third indicator. The fourth is looking then, I would say that is the core, probably one of the core indicators of this area is to what extent local governments have an autonomous right to raise their own revenues and based on their own revenues to make their own decisions. The fifth one is how the central government is facilitating local government through their, let's say, general subventions and conditional and unconditional grants to local government. Because local governments, to get their funding, they have their own funding then, own tax revenues, and their other funding is given by the central government in terms of these conditional and unconditional grants. And the sixth element of this indicator is basically looking at whether the whole legal framework and the implementation of it is leading to let's say, adequate performance of local governments in terms of their fiscal situation. Good. So we will proceed and we will discuss for each of these indicators what are the criteria that we look at. So the first one is, I mean, this first sub-indicator is a quite, let's say, legislative review to see what is in the legislation and if the legislation includes, let's say, the main important elements that we expect to be there. The first one is saying the law establishes criteria for the allocation of resources to local governments. So basically this is a general formulation that in the legislation it is specified that the local governments get revenues or resources from different sources. Either from grants, from own revenues, and etc. The second one stipulates then whether, or is looking whether the law allows for different sources of revenues, so that it is not only one source of revenues, but that it allows a variety of different revenue sources. The third criterion is looking whether if local governments formulate their budget, how to spend their money, and for those where they have autonomy in revenue collection, that there is not a higher level authority that needs to approve the budget. But the local government, within its own democratic framework, within council, can decide its own budget and how it allocates its means. Fourth element looks whether local governments can own assets. What are assets? Maybe a local state-owned enterprise would be an asset. An important one is, let's say, the how do you call that? The land and the use of the land of the municipality. And that the revenues of that they are revenues of the local government. Five is looking at the size and allocation of shared national taxes. Okay, the stable rules. Okay, this is for the general grant that is given to local government. So as I said, there are different systems in the world and also in the EU. And let's say in my country, we do not, it's Netherlands, we do not have a practice about sharing tax revenues. That is not. But in my country, it is only let's say, a general grant subvention from central government to the municipalities. But in other countries there is, and I think that's also the case in Ukraine, there is a system, not also of a general grant, but more important is that there is a system of shared tax. So what we look here is basically more the stability of the system, that it's not every year changed what is municipalities get, but that it's stable. Here only we look at the legislation, still, not at the practice. So whether in the legislation this is provided for. Number 6 is looking whether the legislation provides that national governments can borrow money. I do not know the situation in Ukraine with that respect. Yeah?
Yes, actually I have one question, observation on that, because borrowing autonomy is not always a good thing, because it could contradict the financial stability itself. So in Ukraine we do have rights for borrowing for local government, but with several rules and limits. Legislation said the rules to use the borrowing only for development, and set some limits respected to their own resources, to not to get into situations that they are insolvent. So I think it's a good system, because on one hand we have the autonomy, on the other hand we have some limits and rules.
Yeah, well, it's because on this slide I could only mention 6 criteria. So if we go to the next slide, you will see those areas are also, let's say, recognized by us. So this one is whether at least local governments can borrow, which is then the case, as I understand you. And if we go to the next slide, is that also that there are certain procedural rules. It's not that the local government can without constraints, borrow money, and also the law should establish certain thresholds for those borrowing rights. So, from your, let's say, response, I think this will then be the case in Ukraine. So that is 7, 8, 9. 9 would be guidelines, whether the central government gives guidelines in terms of facilitating, supporting local government to borrow, because many local governments are small. It may be a difficult process for them. So if the central government is facilitating that, of course, all within those constraints overall. And the last element that we look for in the legislation is that if a government is in fiscal distress, they cannot afford to pay the services, or that there is a procedure to support a municipality in such a situation. So these are the elements that we look for in the legislation. So you can consider for yourself. I do not know how much, let's say, the audience here is involved with local government. Also, I do not know the situation in Ukraine. So is there it's not only the Ministry of Finance. I mean, the Ministry of Finance will do something with the financial transfers. But the policy making ministry, is that a ministry of local government? Of regional? That is let's say, the ministry that is in charge of this, let's say, the policy framework. Okay. Yeah. Are there people from the Ministry of Regional Development in the room? By coincidence? No. Okay. Well, I mean, so I've read, so let's say in our, let's say in Sigma, so we have all those different areas. As I said, we have this area of local government. Well, it is called multi-level governance formally. is a new area. So we also have some new people in Sigma that are dealing with this. It's not my, let's say, my proper role, but if I was reading about the situation in Ukraine, I think you have made reforms, I think, in 2014-15 to move towards more, let's say, local autonomous, local self-government. Yeah. But still a challenging process, I believe, because you have a lot of municipalities. I read more than 9,000 in the country, so it is fragmented, and so I mean, well, this is a process that takes some time. So continuing with the, let's say, the indicators that we are using. So the second sub-indicator was looking at whether the government has procedures for is making sure that the, let's say, the income levels between rich municipalities and poor municipalities are mitigated in somehow. In this, let's say, the theory there is speaking about vertical mitigation and horizontal mitigation. Vertical means that, let's say, that from central government, regional government, and local government, there is attention to this aspect. Horizontal equalization means that from rich municipalities, they are getting less transfers from the central government and poor getting higher transfers. So we look at criteria. First, whether it's in the legislation, and the second criterion is a more in calculation to see to what extent in practice the difference between poor municipalities and rich municipalities in terms of their revenue per inhabitant, that those differences are not too high. The third sub-indicator is looking how the central government keeps financial oversight of the local governments. The first criterion is look whether the internal audit system that is promoted by the European Commission is also in place in local governments, so that local governments have an internal audit function, and that this internal audit function is producing audit reports to the local government. The second criterion is looking that there is a responsible authority for the financial oversight. So here I would have a question: if we look at the financial oversight, would that be the Ministry of Regional Development? Or for, let's say, the financial oversight, it is more the Ministry of Finance? Or perhaps these are, this is a task given to the oblast level? In Netherlands, it would be let's say, the Ministry of Interior that looks like that. Well, so that is the question. So for the, let's say, the financial oversight, which let's say, which body within the central government takes responsibility for that. The third one is looking at the, well, whether there is external audit of a local government and the execution of the budget by local government. I believe that last year this mandate has been given to the accounting chamber of Ukraine, so they have now this mandate, so that is good. So that would meet probably this criteria. Number 4 is looking, well, if there are, let's say, irregularities at local government, if there is in the law let's say legal regulations let's say, how to deal with that. Personally, I think this is done because I think you have the financial inspection, state audit service that has this role, but I'm not completely, let's say, happy with the formulation here. Because as we said before, and also by Alistair has been said, that so the European Commission is looking towards more financial control based on audit. And audit is resulting in recommendations how to improve the system, and not, let's say, looking here at sanctions. So, as I said, I'm not fully responsible for this area, but I think this is an element that I need to discuss with my colleague. Yeah. The last one, number 5, external audits conducted in local governments. So, I mean, as I mentioned in number 3, I believe now your ACU has the mandate to audit local governments, but they may still not have, let's say, the staff to do that. So, number 3 is positive. And number 5, we will look at to what extent this body, ACU, has implemented that mandate. And probably, oh my. You did that? Oh. And I'm totally back, or what is this? Yeah, there we are. Okay. So I think we covered then this sub-indicator. The fourth sub-indicator is then, an important one in the, let's say, in the philosophy is whether local governments have the right to raise and manage their, or to basically the right to collect their own taxes. So indeed, that is the first criteria. Can local governments have their raise their own taxes in their own name? So this is not about the shared tax system, because that is done by central government, and then later it is shared, but they have their own taxes. So I believe in Ukraine it's the property tax that is, let's say, I think in all EU countries that is the dominant tax that is given to local governments. So, yes, so then the second criterion is whether local government can set the rate of the tax by themselves, possibly within a constraint, so that it cannot be too much, it cannot be too high. And then the rate of this tax that needs to be approved by the city council, clearly. So in that way, the local government can decide, well, we need more resources because we want to build more schools, etc. So they can make their own decision to increase taxes or decrease taxes as depending on how much services they want to deliver. The third one is, well, to see how, let's say, this own revenue autonomy is turning out in practice. It is making some calculations. It is looking at how much own revenues by local government collected by their own taxes and by their own fees that they can implement. What percentage that is of total government revenue. Here there is a scaling system in the methodology. If there is more, you get more points. If it is lower, you get less points. But the idea is that if own revenues is a larger percentage of total government revenues, that adheres more, or that addresses more, let's say, the philosophy of local self-government. And the fourth one is, in another way, is looking, what is the percentage of, let's say, the own taxes, the revenue from own taxes in a municipality compared to their total revenues. So they will get revenues from the shared taxes, they will get revenues from transfers from government, and they have revenues from their own taxes. What is the share of those own taxes in the total government? If that is more, it means that they have more autonomy about how they about their own revenues and then how they spend it. Besides own revenues, governments can or give all local governments in all UK also get funding via grants, subventions from the central government to them. In Ukraine, that is not only a grant, but it's also the shared tax system is important here. And then there is a difference between grants, which the municipality can spend how they like. That is an unconditional transfer, and there are grants which are for a specific purpose, targeted for education, for schools, for health issues. The criteria that we look is, the first one is whether it's a little bit similar as we discussed before. It's looking at the rules for deciding the amount of those grants. The first criteria is looking whether it is rules-based, whether there are clear, let's say, measurable indicators that determine how much a municipality will get. Both for the unconditional grant, normally that is then based on the number of inhabitants, maybe the economic structure of that municipality. And for conditional grants, if it is one related to education, it is based on the number of students, number of etc. So the first criteria is looking whether it is rules-based, and if it is rules-based, whether it is stable. These rules are not changed year by year. And the second one is a calculation again, because in the philosophy, an unconditional transfer is considered to be better than a conditional transfer, because the unconditional transfer gives autonomy to the local self-government to make the decisions. Okay? And if that percentage is higher, there are more points for, let's say, for the system. Then the last indicator, we're looking at how things, let's say, if the system is being in fiscal control, so to say. The first criterion is, the first criterion is looking at legislation. It is looking at, let's say, one of the main risks with, let's say, the fiscal autonomy, and that is that the government says, well, they give the responsibility for certain tasks to the local government without providing the necessary funds. That makes life difficult for the local government, clearly. And the first criterion is looking whether there is something in the legislation to avoid that central government cannot provide new tasks to local government without adequate funding for those tasks. The second criterion is basically looking at the same issue, but it's looking at, let's say, a practice, and it looks at a number of ministries in different sectors to see how that has resulted in practice. So I think it includes education and health for sure. So if the ministry in their policy framework have given certain functions to the municipalities, whether there has been a consultation process about how much funding that would require. So this is basically a criterium looking whether there is a consultation mechanism between ministries and local government about the required need for funds for certain tasks. The third one is looking whether local governments basically have somehow a proper PFM system and they do not end up in deficits. And it looks at the number of local governments with a budget surplus at the end of the fiscal year. Do not know the situation in Ukraine, in my country, Netherlands, local governments are not allowed to have a deficit. So they have always a surplus, so they would score 100%. I do not know if this type of, let's say, arrangements also applies in Ukraine, but it is looking whether local governments, the percentage of local governments live in surplus at the end of the year. So basically the healthiness of local governments in budget-wise. Number 4, it's looking at local government spending ratio. So this is more about expenditures of local government, and it's looking at the ratio, how much of, let's say, public expenditures is done by local governments compared to total public expenditures. Here it is considered, again in line with the principle, the more the better almost, because local government spending is considered, let's say, in that sense, could be more effective. And well, there are some limits. So I think the limit here is that there is a limit. It should not be less than 10%. Local government versus total expenditure, and more than 30%. That, so if you reach 30%, you get the maximum points. Anything in between, it will be a scale. Number 5, well, also something about, let's say, the healthiness of the PFM system at municipalities. And the decision process on the budget, so it's looking at the percentage of municipalities that have an adopted approved budget before the start of the fiscal year. Probably this is regulated in your in the laws, but then looking at practice. Number 6, well, another one looking at the, let's say, the healthiness of the public finance management system of municipalities. That is whether they built up payment arrears, and payment arrear is basically a liability. Mostly, it's an invoice from some company or contractor, or there are outstanding payments for any benefits that they have to give that are not paid by the end of the year. So we look at how much municipalities have such payment arrears, unpaid obligations. They are unpaid for more than 3 months, so that's a criterion at the end of the calendar year. And the last one we look here is about the debt situation of local governments, and it's also calculation. It's a percentage of the number, the percentage of municipalities that do not, let's say, have a performance in terms of the debt in line with the constraints formulated by the central government. So local governments that have more debt than they are allowed to have. If that is possible, and if that is not possible because of your systems work appropriately, then you get here the maximum points. So let's say all these criteria, as I said, they were, let's say, recently developed because it was a new requirement from the Commission to look at it. But in the last assessments of the Western Balkan, which took place last year, almost. Then we applied these calculations. So this is one which is giving a perspective on this criterion of payment arrears. So it's not let's say, it is quite a realistic risk that municipalities build up these payment arrears. And we see that Western Balkan municipalities, local government are struggling to pay all of their liabilities. And as I said, so this is basically the outcome of the assessments in the Western Balkan country, averaged, added up. So, what do we see here? We see that the legislation, they are able to meet the criteria that we have set. The same in terms of the rules for this fiscal equalization. There is oversight from the central government on local government. Where they score less positive is about to what extent they have truly autonomy in their revenue collection. So it appears that still central government is holding, let's say, keeping them on a tight rope in terms of that, and they are not given true autonomy there. And in terms of the unconditional grants, so that is about, let's say, in the middle. So it's not fully rules-based, and it may not be fully stable yet. And on this, let's say, the last one, fiscal balance, well, its course is low. I think one of these elements was this payment arrears that they just showed, which was much higher than our benchmarks. And I'm sure that also in the Western Balkan there is this problem that central government is giving tasks to the local government without the proper funding, and that will also reduce the scores. So we are, So this is the last, let's say, indicator then for the local government autonomy. And that is then the last indicator in the PFM system. So I just would like then to wrap up, and I don't know. I think it goes faster if we. Is it possible that you move to the first slide? The very first slide of the whole presentation. Yeah. Okay. That's good, but yeah. So, I mean, we are basically at the end of, let's say, what we were supposed to present, and that was in the area of public financial management. As I said, this is one area of 6 areas that Sigma is monitoring on behalf of the European Commission in this process of EU integration. So we looked here at the in-depth to what we are monitoring in public financial management. There are other colleagues and there have been other trainings in the other areas. And so, yeah, this arrow. And again, what we did during these last 2 days, these are the principles in public finance management that we have discussed with you. So you are completely aware of these elements. We looked at 23, 24, 25. That was on budget management, planning of budget, the liquidity management, and the execution and reporting. And you have seen now how we do it. Each principle is broken down in maximum 10 sub-indicators, And in these indicators, you have seen what are the criteria that we use to come to a conclusion. So we have looked at budget management. We have looked at a specific area, public internal financial control, which was internal control and internal audit. That is separate because the EU Commission has a separate chapter in the acquis, chapter 32, that looks at that. We have public procurement, but we have not dealt with public procurement because our colleague specialized in that area was not able to come, but that will be done on a different occasion, probably online or maybe next time he can come. That will be a session especially interesting for all the public procurement professionals operating in Ukraine. Then we discussed also external audit, which is at the end of the public finance budget cycle. And we did lastly then this specific element, how are the financial relations between central government and local government. That's in a nutshell what we have done. We hope that it gave you, let's say, a good understanding of what European Commission is looking for and how we have, let's say, operationalized this in order to give good information on, let's say, the current state in Ukraine, on those aspects, and let's say where and that could be used for the EU to decide where let's say there is a need for reforms or where they think, well, Ukraine is doing a good job already. So we are hoping that this will help EU and Ukraine to, let's say, increase their, let's say, cooperation and partnership, and that it will we prefer earlier sooner than later, that it will lead to, let's say, the accession of Ukraine in, let's say, the European Commission. That would be our, let's say, big wish. I'm done. Alistair, do you want to have a closing remark, or we give the floor to? Yeah. Thank you.
Дуже дякуємо, пане Фердинанде, дуже дякуємо, пане Аластере. І ми з вами,
Ferdinand, dear Alistair, thank you very much. And let's consult it.
Зробити зараз такі підсумкові
changed slightly
ремарки, і
our
відповідно
program,
потім
our
ми з вами йдемо
agenda.
на обід, для того, щоб ми мали
Let's
можливість трошки
have
зекономити
close
часу.
remarks right
І
now,
ті питання,
and
які ми
then
обговорювали
we'll
протягом
have
2
lunch
днів,
to save time.
впроваджувати в практику. Ми
Because
надзвичайно
this time can
дякуємо
be used
нашим
for
колегам. Я хотіла
implementing the
перейти
material
до
you have explained to us. We are extremely grateful to you. And we can proceed basically to the conclusions. Let's start from the very beginning. I'll explain you why the National Agency and Adaptation Center and the High School Public Administration are actively involved in this assessment process arranged by Sigma. Today we have to recall all 5 modules you have participated in before. Those modules provided you lots of information, and you can get access to this information throughout the entire learning program. If possible, please let me see my presentation on the screen. I will highly appreciate it. So, our conclusions regarding the first cycle. I cannot say that today is the end of Sigma's training. This is just the beginning of our journey. What are the principles under those 272 sub-principles that are detailed by Sigma? Maybe we need some assistance from Nikita.
все є.
Okay, now we
Перепрошую.
can see the presentation.
Щодо ролі і значення, чому Сігма і
Let's
чому
talk
національний
about
ЄС.
the role
Якщо ми
of
говоримо
Sigma
про
and
питання
its
реформи
cooperation
державного управління,
with the national
питання
agency.
в рамках саме експертного
The
середовища,
public
Центр
administration
адаптації
reform is being in particular implemented by the Adaptation Center. The Adaptation Center provides the European tools,
звичайно, програми Sigma.
such
Якщо ми
as
говоримо
twinning
про
projects
Sigma в
and of course a
в
Sigma
контексті
program.
саме
Sigma
як
program
експертного такого середовища, як кращого
is
експертного центру
offering the expert
Європейського Союзу, тому
environment
що
because
дійсно
Sigma is
тільки
the best
з
European
позиції
Union expert
експертної програми
hub.
Sigma
Because
відбуваються подальші кроки саме в
Sigma's
рамках співпраці з
opinion
Європейською
matter
комісією, з
for
Європейським
planning
Союзом,
for
і
the
тому позиція
steps in terms of
саме
cooperation with the
експертів,
European
вона є
Commission and European
визначальною в
Union.
подальших
That's why the
кроках
opinion
співпраці з
of
Україною,
the
особливо
Sigma's
сьогодні, в
experts
період
is
активної
crucial
європейської
for
інтеграції. І,
determining
звичайно, ми
future
говоримо про те,
cooperation
що
in the
провайдером має
framework
бути,
of the
звичайно, установа,
European
яка має
integration. We
відношення
know that,
до
of course,
Європейської
a
комісії. І,
provider should
відповідно,
have
якщо говорити
close
про центр адаптації,
ties
ми
to the
працюємо з програмою
European Commission.
Sigma.
And we, as the
Фактично на
Adaptation
початках,
Center,
тобто ми провайдери
have been working
саме
with the Sigma
впровадження
program
таких
nearly
інструментів
from the very
комунікації,
beginning.
звичайно,
We
програми Sigma.
implemented lots of
Якщо ми говоримо саме
training
про
programs and the
Sigma,
Sigma
скажу, що
program
ми
as
дійсно
well.
є таким
We
координатором ефективного
coordinate
впровадження тих
efficient
напрацювань, тих потрібних речей, які мають бути в Україні
implementation
саме
of
в співпраці з програмою Sigma.
important
Започаткована
solutions
сама програма
offered
була
by
ще в
Sigma. The program
1992 році.
itself was
За
founded
ініціативи
as
ОСР,
early
і,
as
відповідно,
in
якщо ми говоримо про головну
1992
мету
as
програми Sigma,
initiative
це
by the
насамперед
OECD. And the
зміцнення
primary goal
основ
of
державного
Sigma
управління
is to
країн-партнерів саме
improve
для
the
вдосконалення державної служби, державного
public
управління,
administration
питання фінансів. Тобто,
conditions
звичайно, на
in
сьогодні
various
наша
spheres,
співпраця,
such
вона
as
особливо
public
актуальною
finance
і особливо
management. And today
важливою.
our
Якщо ми
cooperation
говоримо
is especially
про
relevant and
напрями
important.
самої діяльності програми Sigma в Україні,
Regarding
звичайно,
the
це
Sigma's activity
стратегія
in
реформ
Ukraine,
державного управління,
first and
і
foremost,
експерти
it
програми
pursues
Sigma в цьому
the
приймають надзвичайно
strategy
активну
of a public
роль. Щодо
administration
експертної допомоги,
reform.
звичайно, ви
Sigma
самі
also
спостерігаєте,
provides
наскільки
expert
є
assistance.
допомога
You know
експертів на
that
сьогодні,
the
вона
experts'
досить широка, і
advice
ми дуже
is
вдячні за можливість
invaluable.
такої
The
допомоги
range
з
of
боку
assistance, the
програми
scope of
Sigma в
assistance is very
Україні,
broad,
тому
and
що
we are very
реформи,
grateful
вони
to
дійсно
Sigma.
на сьогодні надзвичайно важливі,
Because
той моніторинг,
reforms
який
are
здійснюють
incredibly
експерти, він
important, and
є
the
на
monitoring
сьогодні
conducted
для
by
нас
the
особливо
experts
необхідним в рамках
is
і угоди
highly
виконання
relevant
угоди
for
про
us,
асоціацію і відповідно самого
especially in
переговорного
terms of
процесу.
AA
Я, звичайно, не могла не
implementation and
сказати про
accession
загальну схему оцінювання
negotiations.
прав, тому що теж
I can help but
експерти програми
mention
Sigma
the
в цьому плані
CAF
досить активно
assessment
працюють, і
system. Sigma's
ми долучаємося до цього
experts are
процесу,
very
тому що центр
helpful in this
адаптації є
respect as
провайдером,
well.
і в нас
We are
працює
actively
офіційно в Україні
engaged because the
український
Adaptation
ресурсний національний
Center
центр
is
впровадження саме
the CAF provider. We've got, by the way, the expert center in charge of CAF implementation. So we are enjoying great cooperation with Sigma. It helps with the public administration reform. It helps to analyze the administrative structures and the reform administrative systems. Today, we always consult the program's experts when we draft our laws relevant for this topic. And Sigma is an active coordinator of the learning and training process.
Технічної допомоги,
And
ви
of
знаєте,
course,
що програма Sigma
you know that Sigma
такі плани технічної допомоги ми погоджуємо,
develops technical
українська
assistance
сторона
plans
погоджує ці
on
плани
an annual
відповідно
basis.
до наших
Ukrainian
потреб, до
side
наших актуальностей.
approves
І якщо
those
говорити
plans,
саме контекст
they are typically
національного
based on
агентства,
our
центр
needs,
адаптації, центр
and
спільно з
then
програмою
the adaptation
Sigma
center
забезпечує
together
проведення
with the
такого
Sigma
цілого ряду заходів,
ensures
які от я перелічувала, тобто в тому числі
various
ми готуємо і
activities
координуємо
and events. So we also coordinate those technical assistance plans. Now, what about our principles? The public administration principles were developed by Sigma, and in December last year we made a presentation of the updated principles. The process was really broad and encompassing. I would like to thank especially because their idea to develop several modules dedicated solely to those principles. We managed to implement this idea. We started the cycle of training in the spring 2025, and this is the end of the first cycle now. You can get access to more detailed information on those principles on our website. The information has been translated into Ukrainian, and you can visit our website and the resource center site and the national school site. The information is there. It's for you to improve your awareness and facilitate your professional development. You can also scan a QR code to get the information provided throughout those 5 modules. In addition, the materials will be sent to your email addresses. And let me reiterate, you are welcome to visit our websites to get broader information, which is not confined solely to the modules. Today, Mr. Ferdinand gave you an overview of principles applied to assess the Ukrainian situation. The last assessment was conducted several years ago, and in spite of war, Ukraine has demonstrated significant progress. So we are moving forward, and you see that in 2023 we started from the very beginning of the year. We filled out the tables, we participated in training, everyone was actively engaged in working with PARIS system. I'm not going to go into detail. Many of you, of course, participated in filling out the questionnaire. You know about methodology, of course, and the information is available on the Sigma website and our websites as well.
Аналіз стану справ у 2023 році, і зараз, наскільки я проінформована, офіційно ще цієї інформації немає, тому я не буду озвучувати наш широкий загал, тобто по великому рахунку кожні 3 роки здійснюється оцінка, але в зв'язку з війною, скажімо, терміни по оцінці стану справ, вони можуть бути дещо змінені, але офіційно ще такої інформації ми не маємо, тому, скажімо, ці дані в процесі. Ну і знову ж таки, пане Фердинанде, по принципам, тобто 6 сфер, і я повертаюсь до того, що ми з вами працювали по всіх 6 сферах державного управління, тобто всі 32 принципи, вони розділені між цими сферами, скажімо, деякі принципи, вони проходять від початку і до кінця, саме в рамках оновлених принципів державного управління, і відповідно ці принципи, вони нам надають досить детальні рекомендації, яким чином можна і потрібно досягати результатів, і відповідно, щоб була забезпечена інституційна та адміністративна спроможність. Не буду зупинятись на по тематичних сферах. Ви знову ж таки цю презентацію маєте можливість отримати і користуватися більш детально по напрямам, відповідно, кому буде цікаво, і навіть скористатися більшою інформацією. Це те, що стосується стосується самих методичних матеріалів. От скажу, що якщо ми повертаємося до оцінки стану справ у 2023 році, звичайно, були дані рекомендації, вони були і короткострокові рекомендації, які, скажімо, мали бути виконані протягом 1-2 років, і, звичайно, середньострокові рекомендації, тобто вони розраховані на виконання 3-5 років, і бачите, що на сьогодні ми рухаємось, тому що ті питання, які були в рекомендаціях, вони на сьогодні, вони, скажімо, мають тепер вже трошки інший зміст, є відповідно нормативно-правові документи, є відповідні рухи в цьому напрямку, тому, скажімо, сподіваємося, що наступна оцінка стану справ буде у нас, скажімо, ще на кращому рівні, і ми виконаємо ті позиції, які були в рекомендаціях експертів СІГМА. І навчальний курс. Тобто, шановні колеги, хто не мав можливості відвідати всі навчальні курси, тобто в нас вони були і в онлайн режимі, і в офлайн режимі, знову ж таки, я коротенько нагадаю про їх, скажімо, складові, тобто це було 5 модулів. Скажу таку статистику, що насамперед це навчальний курс, який був започаткований для того, щоб ми дійсно попрацювали з оновленими принципами СІГМА, для того, щоб мали можливість далі працювати з оцінкою стану справ, в тому числі з підготовкою нової стратегії реформування державного управління. Тобто цілу ряду стратегічних документів ми маємо теж, скажімо, враховувати принципи в їх підготовці. Якщо говорити про цільову групу, звичайно, це наші колеги, державні службовці, це наші колеги, які саме безпосередньо займаються питаннями координації, розробки, моніторингу оцінки стану справ, реалізації стратегії реформування державного управління. Це насамперед. І я надзвичайно вдячна, користуючись тим, що в нас вчора і сьогодні от саме питання управління фінансами. Я дуже дякую колегам, які долучилися із відповідних державних установ, тому що дійсно питання аудиту внутрішнього, питання аудиту зовнішнього, питання управління фінансами, дуже багато речей для нас в рамках саме принципів СІГМА на сьогодні вони є, скажімо, більше зрозумілими, так розклали дійсно досить по поличкам, і дуже дякую, колеги, вам за це. Отже, по 5 тематичним модулям. По 5 модулям, тобто насамперед був перший модуль, ми починали фактично із основ, тобто це стратегічна основа для всієї навчальної програми, і відповідно відбувалися питання в рамках саме принципів формування, узгодження стратегії і відповідно політики, і ми розглядали цілий ряд питань, починаючи із стратегії, для чого вона потрібна, що ми вивчаємо. Ми працювали саме над питаннями, які координує уряд, до нас долучалися представники секретаріату Кабінету міністрів, апарату Верховної Ради, тобто така була дійсно така гарна дискусія, і дуже дякуємо, що ми почали такий дуже дійсно був потужний старт, і він, скажімо, така градус співпраці, градус цієї роботи, він ніяким чином не був знижений. Модуль 2. Державна служба і управління людськими ресурсами. Ми сконцентрувалися саме на питання державної служби, на питання реформи державної служби. На сьогодні дуже важлива інформація саме з питань працевлаштування державних службовців, лідерство, питання мотивації, тобто різні, скажімо, позиції в рамках принципів СІГМА. Ми їх з ними працювали, і відповідно всі презентації, вся інформація, матеріали, вони вже є і у нас розміщені на наших ресурсах. Дуже важливий модуль надання послуг і цифровізації, це насамперед людиноцентричність як концептуальна основа публічного сервісу, тобто принцип. Відбувся в кінці травня, відбувся саме в рамках питань державного управління, в рамках надання надання якісних послуг, і
provision of
до нас
high-quality
долучились
public services.
представники
We were
Міністерства
joined by
цифровізації, до нас
representatives of the
долучилися
Ministry of
представники
Digital,
центрів надання
representatives of
адміністративних
Administrative
послуг,
Service Center Provision
тому що на
Service
сьогодні
Provision Centers,
адміністративні
because
послуги,
today
вони
administrative services
дійсно дуже доступні,
are
вони
indeed
доступні
very
як і
available.
онлайн,
They
так і
available
офлайн,
both online
враховуючи
and
різні
offline,
потреби, і дякую
taking
нашим
into account
колегам,
different
які
needs. We are grateful
досить
to our
детально
colleagues who
скоординували і розказали
ensured
про
this
принципи, які
for
координують
efficient
щодо надання
coordination
послуг і
and
цифровізації.
share information about
Звичайно,
this
дуже важливий, він не менш
administrative
важливий
service
був модуль
process.
організації,
They have
звітність
extremely
і
important
нагляд.
module, organization,
Відбувся
accountability
цей
and
в форматі онлайн,
They had
саме
this
побудова
module in
прозорої, підзвітної,
online
доброчесної
format. It was
системи
about
управління. Це
Prozoro, it's
надзвичайно
about
важливо.
integrity
Ми
management
з вами вже
system.
про це
It
говорили,
was very
що
important. We
доброчесність
already
на
had the
державній
chance to
службі
discuss
це
it because integrity
дійсно
in civil
є
service
такою
is
основоположною складовою,
a
тому що
very
особливо в
foundational
умовах війни
component,
ми
especially
маємо
now amidst
бути,
the war.
не маємо
We
довіряти один одному,
must
маємо
trust each
дійсно
other,
бути
we
доброчесними,
must remain
і ці
integral,
питання теж
and
обговорювалися саме в
we
рамках
had the chance
модуля
to discuss it.
4-го теж
It's part
організація,
of module
підзвітність і
for
нагляд.
organization,
Що стосується
accountability and
нашого
oversight.
сьогоднішнього
And as for
модулю,
our
він
today's
у нас
module,
досить і вчора, і сьогодні ще так в активному
two days
такому
were
спогаді,
quite
якби це все
intense.
триває.
It's still
Тому
fresh, it's
я не
still
буду
ongoing,
зупинятись
so I'm
на
not
кожному,
going to
починаючи з
focus
23-го і
on
закінчуючи
each of
32-м
you,
принципом,
on each of
детально
these principles,
згадувати, тому
23
що
to 32.
дійсно
I
питання
won't
управління
delve
державними
into
фінансами,
detail
вони якби
because
закінчують
public finance
цикл
management
принципів
actually ends
програми
cycle of
Sigma і
Sigma
насамперед,
program.
якщо говорити про висновки,
And
ви
if we talk
бачите,
about
тобто
some
ми
conclusions,
з вами
you
рухаємося
see
далі.
that we are
І
moving
я,
on.
закінчуючи, скажімо,
And,
по висновкам і результатам
Just to
навчального
wrap up
курсу, ви бачите,
this
є останній
summary,
пункт,
you
подальші
see
кроки.
this last
Ми
step.
з вами не
Future
зупиняємося, ми
steps,
з вами
we're not going to
рухаємося
stop.
далі,
We will move on.
тому що на
Because
сьогодні
today
для нас надзвичайно важлива
extremely
підтримка і допомога
important for
наших
us
колег.
to
І ще раз
this,
хочу
I mean,
подякувати
support and assistance by
пану
our
Аластеру,
colleagues. Mr.
дуже
Alistair,
подякувати
thank
пану
you so much.
Фердінанду
Mr.
за
Ferdinand,
безпосередню
thank
участь.
you
Ви
so much
завершуєте
for your
перший цикл
participation.
навчань
You're
насправді,
here to wrap
тому
up
що
the first
восени
cycle of our trainings,
починається наступний
because in
етап,
fall we
наступний
will start
виконання
the next
робочого плану
stage,
програми Sigma, і
implementation
ми
of Sigma
продовжуємо.
program operational plan,
Тому
and we will
я
continue.
на сам кінець
And
знову ж таки
just
хотіла
to
згадати
wrap up,
про наших колег, про
I want to
співпрацю з
mention
програмою
our
Sigma і з
colleagues, our
паном Грегором
collaboration with
Вірантам.
Sigma
Дуже
program, Mr.
дякуємо
Gregor Verant.
за
Thank you
постійну
so much
підтримку
for your
України.
constant
Дякуємо пану
support for
Мартіншу
Ukraine.
Крівіншу,
We
дякуємо
great-
Леху Марцинковському,
grateful to
дякуємо
Mr.
Ніку
Krivins,
Тойсу,
Mr.
дякуємо
Marcinkovsky, Mr.
нашим
Toys.
колегам Леху Марцинковському.
Our
Тобто для
colleague
нас
Lech
дійсно
Marcinkovsky,
це не
because
просто старші радники
For
програми
us, you are
Sigma,
not just
координатори,
per Sigma
експерти,
program
це
senior
дійсно друзі,
policy
це дійсно
advisors,
важлива
coordinators and
підтримка.
experts. You are
І
our
ми
real
надзвичайно
friends,
вам
an important
вдячні
source
за
of
допомогу
support,
і
and
за
we are really
сприяння
grateful
реформам в
for your
Україні.
support and
Тому,
facilitation
шановні
of reforms
колеги,
in Ukraine.
якщо
Therefore,
є
dear
якісь
colleagues,
питання,
if you
будь
have
ласка,
any
згадуйте,
questions, please
задавайте.
feel free to
Поки
ask
ми
them.
думаємо, які є в
And,
нас питання, хочу
while
ще
you
окремо
think about
подякувати
questions,
нашим
I
колегам,
want to also
перекладачам.
express
Будь
gratitude to
ласка,
our colleagues,
аплодисменти.
interpreters.
Дівчата, дуже дякуємо за
Thank you
якісний
so much
переклад
for high
і
quality
сподіваємося на подальшу
interpretation.
плідну
And we
співпрацю.
hope for future
Шановні колеги, якщо
fruitful
є питання,
cooperation.
будь ласка,
So,
у
dear
вас є
colleagues,
можливість
if you have
задати.
any questions now, it's your chance to ask them.
Аластер.
Please ask questions, but before we leave, we need to do a survey to measure our quality. So I'd appreciate if you could scan the QR code and complete the survey as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Дякую. У вас є можливість
Thank you.
відсканувати
So
теж
the
QR-код.
place is
Шановні
scan
колеги,
QR
якщо
code now.
немає
And dear
питань,
colleagues, if you
нагадую,
don't
всі
have any
презентації,
questions, let
вся
me remind you that the
інформація,
presentations
все,
and
що для вас
materials
необхідно, є у нас на
is
сайтах.
available
І,
on
відповідно, ми
our
домовилися з
website.
експертами,
And we have
що
agreed with
ті
our
презентації,
experts
які
that the
були на
presentations
минулому і позаминулому
used
модулі,
during the
сьогодні,
last three
сподіваюсь,
modules
вони будуть
will
перекладені
be translated
експертами програми Sigma,
into
і ви
Ukrainian
теж
by
їх отримаєте,
Sigma
в тому
program
числі
experts,
і
and
українською
you will
мовою.
get
Але
access
це
to
буде
them in
трошечки
Ukrainian,
пізніше.
but it will happen a little bit later.
Дякую вам всім
Thank
за
you so
увагу,
much
всім
for
нам
your
бажаю
attention.
миру і
I
перемоги.
hope
Слава Україні!
for
Дуже
peace and
дякую вам.
victory. Glory to Ukraine.